The grand hall of the alien king's palace was as silent as a tomb. King Zarian sat on his golden throne, his sharp, commanding gaze fixed on the council gathered before him. His advisors murmured among themselves, their doubt about his latest decision evident in their furtive glances. For the first time in decades, the king's confidence seemed fragile. He looked at his daughter, Lyra, who stood by his side. Her pale blue skin shimmered under the glowing lights of the chamber, but her posture betrayed her unease. She was slim and delicate, traits the council considered signs of weakness. Lyra had heard the whispers all her life. She was unworthy of the throne, a princess too fragile for a kingdom at war. But Lyra wasn't just afraid of what others thought. Deep inside, she doubted herself. She had never won a battle, never commanded troops, and never felt the fire of strength her father had tried to ignite in her since childhood. King Zarian rose to his feet, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "I have made my decision. Lyra will leave the palace tomorrow. She will train under a human warrior." The room erupted in disbelief. The word human buzzed like an insult among the council members. Humans were considered unpredictable, their methods unorthodox, and their morals questionable. Why would the great king entrust his only daughter's future to one? Lyra looked up at her father, her eyes wide with shock. "Father, why a human?" "Enough," Xarian said, his voice heavy with authority, but laced with something softer, worry. He turned to face her fully. "You are my daughter, Lyra, and I see greatness in you. But the path you must walk is not one I can guide you on. This human warrior has faced battles no one else could endure. He will teach you what it means to be strong." Lyra clenched her fists, her chest tightening with both fear and frustration. She had hoped for another chance to prove herself within the palace walls, not exile to some unknown planet. Yet her father's gaze left no room for argument. She bowed her head and whispered, "I will do as you command." The following day, the palace gates opened to a figure unlike any Lyra had ever seen. Ethan stepped into the grand hall, his steps calm and steady. He wasn't what she expected. He wasn't particularly tall, nor did he wear the heavy armor she associated with warriors. Instead, he was dressed in practical, worn clothes and carried only a small pack. His face was unremarkable, save for the intensity in his green eyes that seemed to scan everything and miss nothing. "Ethan, the human warrior," King Zarian introduced, his tone neutral but measured. "This is my daughter, Lyra. She is in your hands." Ethan gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "Understood." Lyra felt a wave of doubt wash over her. This man didn't look like a warrior. How could he possibly help her become the leader her people needed? She couldn't stop herself from blurting out, "You're the one who's supposed to train me." Ethan met her gaze, his calm demeanor unshaken by her skepticism. "You think I don't look the part," he said, his voice steady but firm. "That's good. You'll learn that strength doesn't always come from what's obvious." His words stung, not because they were unkind, but because they felt uncomfortably true. Before Lyra could respond, Ethan turned to the king. "We leave now. The sooner we begin, the better." Lyra barely had time to pack before she was ushered to a waiting ship. As the palace disappeared into the horizon, she felt the weight of her future settle on her shoulders. She didn't know if Ethan could help her, or if she could rise to the challenge. But one thing was clear. Her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. The transport ship descended onto a rugged, barren planet. Through the small window, Lyra could see endless stretches of rocky terrain under a dim, gray sky. There were no grand cities or towering spires like in her father's kingdom. This place felt desolate and unwelcoming, just like the man sitting silently across from her. Ethan had barely spoken a word since they left the palace. He had only given her brief instructions on packing, and then focused entirely on preparing the ship for their journey. His silence annoyed her, but she was too proud to break it. The ship landed with a soft thud, and the ramp lowered. Ethan stood, his movements calm but efficient. "We're here," he said simply, grabbing his bag and heading down the ramp without waiting for her. Lara hesitated, clutching her own pack tightly. She looked around the empty interior of the ship, suddenly feeling a pang of doubt. She had grown up surrounded by luxury and servants, yet now she was expected to survive on a planet where even the air felt heavy. Gritting her teeth, she pushed herself to follow Ethan. Outside, the air was cool and dry. A sharp wind carried fine dust that stung her skin. Ethan was already several steps ahead, walking toward what looked like a small, weathered building nestled between jagged rocks. "Is this where we'll be staying?" she asked, quickening her pace to catch up. Ethan glanced back at her and smirked. "No, this is just where I keep supplies. You'll be staying out here." He gestured to the wide, rocky landscape around them. Her jaw dropped. "Out here? You mean no shelter?" Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Lyra, survival doesn't come with comfort. You're here to learn how to adapt, to endure, and to grow stronger. That starts by letting go of the things you've been pampered with all your life." She glared at him, her frustration bubbling over. "I am not some fragile doll. I can handle discomfort, but this is unreasonable." Ethan's gaze hardened. "Good. Then prove it." Without another word, he continued toward the building. Lyra stared after him, anger and confusion churning in her mind. She wasn't sure if she hated him or if he was exactly the teacher she needed. Inside the small building, Ethan handed her a simple blanket, a canteen of water, and a ration pack. "This will last you the night," he said. "You'll set up camp over there." He pointed to a flat area near a rocky outcrop. Lara snatched the supplies from him, muttering under her breath as she stomped off. She spread the blanket on the hard ground and sat down, shivering as the cold wind picked up. The ration pack tasted bland and dry, and the water barely quenched her thirst. As darkness fell, she realized how alone she truly was. The faint light from the stars barely illuminated the land, and strange sounds echoed from the shadows. She clutched the blanket tightly, her mind racing with doubts. Could she really survive this? The night was long and restless. When the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, Lyra felt as though she hadn't slept at all. Her body ached, her stomach grumbled, and her spirit was low. Ethan approached her campsite with his usual calm demeanor. "Not bad for your first night," he said, his tone unreadable. Lyra glared at him. "You call this training? This is just torture." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Training isn't supposed to be easy. It's supposed to push you past what you think you can handle. You survived the night, didn't you?" She didn't answer, but deep down, she knew he was right. "Get ready," Ethan said. "Today we begin the real work." As he walked away, Lyra felt a flicker of determination. She had survived one night. Maybe she could survive the next challenge too. She didn't know what Ethan had planned, but she was ready to face it, no matter how harsh it was. The morning sun was pale and cold, barely warming the rocky terrain around them. Lyra stood where Ethan had told her to, arms crossed, exhaustion still clinging to her from the previous night. She was irritated, hungry, and skeptical about whatever real work Ethan had in mind. Ethan appeared carrying a small bag and a long metal staff. Without a word, he tossed the staff at her feet. "What's this?" Lyra asked, her voice sharp. "Your first tool," Ethan replied. "Today we're going to learn the basics of survival and defense. That staff will keep you alive if you use it right." Lyra frowned, picking up the staff. It was heavier than it looked, cold to the touch. Defense. Against what? Ethan gestured toward the rocky outcrops behind her. "You'll see." As if on cue, a guttural growl echoed from the shadows. Lyra spun around, clutching the staff tightly. From the rocks emerged a beast, its skin a dull gray that blended with the terrain. Its glowing yellow eyes fixed on her, and its sharp teeth gleamed as it snarled. Lyra's heart raced. "You're joking. You expect me to fight that?" Ethan crossed his arms and stood back, his expression calm. This is a controlled environment. The creature is dangerous, but it's not invincible. You have the staff. Use it. Before Liara could argue, the beast lunged at her. She stumbled back, instinctively raising the staff. The creature's claws scraped against the metal, sending vibrations up her arms. Panic surged through her as she swung wildly, missing her target. Focus, Ethan barked from the sidelines. Watch its movements. Anticipate, don't react. The beast circled her, its growls low and threatening. Liara tried to steady her breathing, her grip tightening on the staff. She watched the way it moved, the way its muscles tensed before each step. When it lunged again, she sidestepped and swung the staff with all her strength. This time, it connected. The beast yelped and staggered, retreating a few steps. Liara's eyes widened in surprise. She had actually hit it. Good, Ethan said, his voice calm but encouraging. Now keep going. Don't let it recover. Fueled by a mix of fear and newfound determination, Liara advanced. The beast growled and lunged again, but this time she was ready. She ducked under its claws and struck it on the side, driving it back further. After several more exchanges, the beast let out a defeated whimper and slunk away into the shadows. Liara stood frozen, her chest heaving, the staff still gripped tightly in her hands. Ethan walked over, nodding in approval. Not bad for your first fight. Liara turned to him, anger and adrenaline burning in her eyes. You could have warned me. And what would that have changed? Ethan asked, his tone steady. You survived because you adapted. You stayed calm and used your tools. That's what matters. Liara wanted to argue, but she couldn't deny the truth in his words. She had faced something she thought she couldn't handle. And won. Ethan handed her a canteen of water, his expression softening slightly. You're stronger than you think, Liara. But strength isn't just about swinging a weapon. It's about staying calm under pressure, making smart decisions, and refusing to give up. As she drank, the reality of what she had just done began to sink in. She had faced a beast on her own and emerged victorious. It wasn't just luck. There was a spark of strength within her she hadn't realized before. For the first time since arriving on this harsh planet, Liara felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could survive this training after all. Ethan picked up the staff and placed it back in her hands. Keep this close. You'll need it again soon. Liara nodded, determination lighting her pale blue eyes. The road ahead still seemed impossible, but now she was starting to believe she could walk it. You said. The sun was setting behind the jagged hills, painting the barren landscape in hues of orange and red. Liara sat by a small fire Ethan had built, her hands resting on her knees. She stared into the flames, still replaying the events of the day in her mind. The memory of the beast lunging at her, the way she had managed to strike it, and the way it had retreated still sent a shiver through her. Ethan sat across from her, sharpening a knife with a steady hand. The crackling fire lit up his face, casting shadows that made him look both calm and intimidating. He had been quiet since the fight, only giving her a few pointers before they returned to camp. Finally, Liara broke the silence. That thing could have killed me. Ethan didn't look up. It didn't. She frowned, frustrated by his short response. You're not even going to explain why you made me face it alone. Ethan paused, glancing at her. Because you needed to see what you're capable of. If I jumped in, you wouldn't have learned anything. You'd still think you're weak. Liara clenched her fists. She hated that he was right. She had always thought of herself as fragile, unfit for leadership. But today, for the first time, she had seen a different side of herself. Do you ever doubt yourself? She asked suddenly, her voice softer. Ethan's movements stopped, and for a moment, he didn't answer. Then he set the knife down and looked at her, his green eyes serious. All the time. Anyone who says they don't is either lying or a fool. Liara blinked, surprised by his honesty. Then how do you keep going? Ethan leaned back, resting his arms on his knees. by remembering why I started. I faced things that should have broken me, but I pushed through because I had to. Strength isn't about never doubting yourself. It's about moving forward despite the doubt. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Lyra found herself nodding slowly, absorbing what he had said. As the fire crackled between them, Ethan pulled out a small metal box and opened it. Inside were a few dried strips of meat, which he handed to her. "Eat. You'll need your energy tomorrow." Lyra took the food, surprised by the simple kindness. She had expected him to be harsh and unrelenting, but there were moments, like this one, when he showed a softer side. "Thank you," she said quietly, chewing on the meat. Ethan nodded, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "You did well today. Better than I expected." The rare compliment caught her off guard. She looked at him, unsure how to respond. I didn't think I could do it." "That's the point," Ethan said with a faint smile. "You don't know what you're capable of until you're forced to find out." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the flames dance. For the first time since leaving the palace, Lyra didn't feel completely out of place. Ethan's tough exterior still annoyed her, but she was starting to see the wisdom behind his methods. After a while, Ethan stood and began clearing the area around the fire. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be harder." Lyra groaned. "Harder? Is that even possible?" Ethan smirked. "You'll find out." As he walked away to check the perimeter, Lyra lay down on the rough ground, wrapping her blanket tightly around her. The stars above seemed brighter tonight, and for the first time, she felt a spark of hope. Ethan was right. She was stronger than she thought. And if she could survive today, maybe she could survive tomorrow too. With that thought, Lyra closed her eyes, the faint warmth of the fire lulling her into a deep, dreamless sleep. The sun rose early the next morning, casting a pale light over the rocky landscape. Lyra woke with a start, the events of the previous day still fresh in her mind. She had survived her first real test, but Ethan's words kept echoing in her mind. Tomorrow's going to be harder. Stretching her sore muscles, she looked around the camp. Ethan was already up, packing his things. There was no sign of the usual routine, a morning lesson or sparring session. Instead, he seemed focused, almost distant, as if preparing for something important. "Ethan," she called, rubbing her eyes. "What are we doing today?" He glanced over at her, a small, almost amused smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I thought I'd give you a little challenge today." Lyra's heart skipped. A challenge. She had barely made it through the last one. She stood quickly, trying to hide the nervousness in her voice. "What kind of challenge?" Ethan handed her a small device from his pack, a simple-looking communicator. "You'll lead a team of 3 trainees. Your mission is to retrieve something from the other side of this rocky ridge." He gestured toward the distant hills. "The catch is, you won't be doing it alone." Her brow furrowed. "So, I'm not alone, but I'm still in charge." He nodded. "You'll be their leader. How you lead will determine if you succeed or fail. It's not about being the strongest or the most skilled. It's about making decisions that will keep everyone alive." Lyra swallowed hard. Leading a group was different from fighting alone. She wasn't sure if she was ready to be in charge of anyone, but Ethan's face was serious. She had no choice but to try. The walk to the ridge was long and quiet. Ethan, as usual, didn't offer much in the way of conversation, leaving Lyra to think about what lay ahead. When they arrived at a small outpost near the ridge, she saw 3 other trainees, 2 young men and a woman, waiting for her. They were dressed in basic combat gear, their eyes alert but unreadable. The group didn't greet her, instead standing at attention as Ethan handed her the device. "This is your team now," he said, his voice sharp. "You're in charge. They'll follow your orders." Lyra looked at her team, suddenly feeling a weight on her shoulders. These were people who had been through their own training, and now they were expected to follow her lead. She swallowed hard and cleared her throat. "All right," she said, trying to sound confident. "We need to retrieve the object on the other side of the ridge. Stick together, move quickly, and stay alert. I'll lead the way." The three trainees nodded, but their expressions didn't change. Lyra could feel their doubt, could see it in the way they looked at each other. They didn't think she was capable. As they moved out, Lyra kept her pace steady, her eyes scanning the terrain ahead. Every sound seemed amplified in the silence. Every footstep, every rustle of the wind. The ridge loomed closer, its jagged edges casting long shadows on the ground. About halfway there, Lyra heard the soft sound of movement behind her. One of the trainees, a tall man with dark hair, spoke up. "We should split up. It'll be faster." Lyra's heart skipped. She wasn't sure if splitting up was a good idea, but she also didn't want to show hesitation in front of her team. After a moment of thought, she decided to stick with her instincts. "No," she said firmly. "We stay together. We don't know what's ahead, and splitting up could put us in danger." The man frowned but didn't argue. They continued in silence, and Lyra's confidence began to grow. She was leading them, and so far her decision had been the right one. When they finally reached the other side of the ridge, the object, a small but highly important data chip, was waiting for them, just as Ethan had said. Lyra felt a wave of relief wash over her, but as they turned to head back, the sound of a distant growl interrupted their peace. Lyra's heart raced as a wild creature appeared, blocking the path. It was large, with sharp teeth and glowing eyes, the same type of creature they had fought before. The team froze. Lyra had a split second to decide what to do. "Get ready," she shouted. "Stay close and don't panic." The trainees quickly raised their weapons, but it was Lyra who made the first move, stepping forward with the staff. The creature charged, and without hesitation, she struck, remembering what Ethan had taught her. She moved with purpose, using her environment to her advantage, just as she had during her earlier fight. The creature fought back fiercely, but Lyra kept her focus. With a well-placed strike, she finally knocked the beast back. The team followed her lead, quickly subduing the creature together. As it retreated into the shadows, Lyra's heart pounded, but there was no time to rest. She turned to her team. "Let's go. Move." The days on the harsh planet blended into one another. Lyra had become stronger, both physically and mentally. The training was grueling, but she could feel herself changing. Every lesson with Ethan, every challenge, was pushing her to become someone she barely recognized, a leader, a warrior. The doubts that once clouded her mind were slowly being replaced with a new, quiet confidence. But as the days passed, the nagging thought of returning to her home planet started to weigh on her. Her father had sent her here to train, to become the leader he believed she could be. But what if she wasn't ready? What if she failed him? Lyra had grown, yes, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to face the throne. The alien kingdom was a complex place, full of politics, expectations, and old traditions. Would the people accept her? Would they see the woman who had spent months struggling in the desert and battling beasts, or would they still see the weak princess they had always known? Ethan noticed her growing unease one evening as they sat by the fire. He was sharpening his knife. As usual, his movements methodical and calm. Lyra had been staring into the flames for what felt like hours, lost in her thoughts. "You're thinking about your return, aren't you?" Ethan's voice broke the silence. Lyra nodded slowly, not looking at him. "I don't know if I'm ready. The kingdom, my father, they expect me to be perfect. What if they still see me as weak?" Ethan paused, the knife resting on his knee. "You're not weak anymore," he said simply. "The only thing standing between you and your throne is your fear. You've proven yourself here, time and time again. The people won't know what hit them when you return." She turned to face him, searching his eyes for any sign of doubt, but there was none. His gaze was steady, unwavering. "But they've never seen this version of me. What if they don't accept me? What if they think I'm a fraud?" Ethan leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. They will follow you, Lyra, because you've earned it. Leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being strong enough to lead, even when you're scared. You've already shown that. Lyra felt a strange mix of emotions stir inside her. Relief, uncertainty, and something else, something deeper. She had worked so hard to get here, but now that the moment was close, she realized how much she still feared failure. The thought of returning to her people, to her father, and standing before the council was overwhelming. Ethan stood, dusting off his hands. You'll never know until you try, and you won't be alone. I'll be there with you. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile. Now, get some rest. Tomorrow, we move. Lyra didn't say anything, but she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She didn't have all the answers, and she wasn't sure what would happen when she returned, but for the first time, she felt ready. The next morning, Lyra and Ethan set out early. As they trekked back to the ship, Lyra's thoughts were a whirlwind. The time on the barren planet had changed her in ways she couldn't fully explain. She had learned the importance of staying calm under pressure, of using her mind as much as her strength, and of relying on her instincts. But the real test was ahead of her, facing her father and her people, who had always expected so much. The ship ride back was quiet, but this time it didn't feel oppressive. It felt like a journey of transformation, a reminder of how far she had come. Lyra looked out the window, watching the stars twinkle in the distance, and realized that no matter what happened when she returned, she had already changed. She had learned what it truly meant to be strong. As the planet came into view, the familiar sight of her kingdom's landscape spread out below them. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. She was going back to the throne, but this time, she wasn't the scared princess who had left months ago. She was a leader, a warrior. The ship landed near the royal palace, and Lyra felt the weight of her future pressing down on her. But as she stepped off the ramp, she stood tall. She wasn't just the daughter of a king anymore. She was someone who had earned her place in this world. Ethan walked beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. He didn't need to say anything. She could feel his support in every step they took toward the palace. "This is your moment," he said, his voice quiet. Lyra nodded, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. She was ready to face whatever came her way. The palace gates loomed ahead, tall and imposing. Lyra could feel her heart racing in her chest as she approached, the weight of her mission pressing down on her. This was the moment she had been training for, the moment that would determine everything. Would her people see her as the leader they needed, or would they reject her, still believing her weak and unworthy? Ethan walked beside her, silent as always, his presence a quiet reassurance. He had been with her throughout the long months of training, helping her discover a strength she never knew she had. But now, as they stood on the threshold of the palace, she had to stand on her own. This wasn't a battle she could fight with a staff or her fists. This was about proving to everyone, including herself, that she was capable of leading. The palace guards stepped aside as she approached, their expressions unreadable. Lyra tried to steady her breath, remembering all the lessons she had learned, about staying calm, about trusting herself. But as the heavy doors of the throne room opened, a wave of anxiety hit her like a physical blow. Her father sat at the grand throne, his regal presence filling the room. The council members stood around him, watching her with curious yet skeptical eyes. They had always doubted her, always seen her as the fragile princess who could never rule. But Lyra wasn't that girl anymore. She had changed, and now she had to prove it. The king's eyes met hers, his expression unreadable. "Lyra," he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "You have returned. I trust you've learned what you needed." Lyra stood tall, meeting her father's gaze with newfound confidence. "I have, father, and I am ready to lead." Her voice was steady, stronger than she ever thought it could be. She glanced around at the council, at the faces that had once looked at her with doubt. "I will prove to you that I am worthy of this throne." The room was silent for a moment, and for a brief second, Lara wondered if her words had fallen flat, if they still saw her as weak. But then, the king's face softened, just slightly, before he stood and motioned for her to approach. "Come forward, Lara," he commanded. Lyra's steps were sure as she walked toward the throne. She could feel the eyes of the council on her, but she refused to let them break her focus. She had spent too long learning to control her fear, to let it stop her now. The throne was within reach, but it wasn't just the seat of power she sought. It was the respect she had worked so hard to earn. When she reached the throne, the king looked at her with a strange expression in his eyes. "You have changed," he said quietly, as though he had not expected her to return this strong. "I see now that you have the strength to lead. The question is, do you have the wisdom?" Lara didn't hesitate. "I've learned more than I could ever have imagined. I've learned that strength is not just about physical power. It's about resilience, about making the hard choices when they matter. And I've learned how to trust my instincts. I believe I can lead our people, not just because of what I've done, but because of who I've become." The king nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as if evaluating her every word. Then, without another word, he stood up and stepped aside. The council members exchanged confused glances, but the king's actions spoke louder than any words. "Then it is yours," he said, motioning to the throne. "The throne and the kingdom are yours to command, Lara. Prove to them what you have proven to me." Lara stood still, feeling the surge of emotion she could hardly control. She had worked for this moment, fought for it, and now it was finally hers. She took a deep breath and sat on the throne, feeling its weight, its responsibility. But this time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a natural fit. The council members were silent, their faces a mixture of surprise and admiration. They had expected a fragile, untested princess, but what they saw now was a woman who had been forged in the fires of training, a woman who had faced her doubts and conquered them. A true leader. Ethan, standing off to the side, gave a small, approving nod. Lara met his eyes and smiled. He was proud of her, and that meant more than anything. She had come a long way from the unsure princess who had left the palace months ago. She had become the warrior and leader her people needed. The kingdom was hers now, and she would lead it with strength, wisdom, and the lessons she had learned along the way. Lara had truly awakened. The throne room had never felt so different. Lara sat in the royal seat, her back straight, her hands resting on the arms of the throne. She looked around at the council members, who now stood in silence, waiting for her to speak. They had once doubted her, whispered behind her back about her weakness, her inability to lead. Now, they watched her with a mixture of awe and respect. The room was quiet, save for the soft rustle of their robes as they shifted, trying to read her every move. Lara could feel their eyes on her, but instead of shrinking away like she might have in the past, she felt a surge of pride and power. This was her moment. She stood slowly, her eyes sweeping across the council. "We are at the beginning of a new era," she said, her voice calm but filled with authority. "Our kingdom has been divided for too long, weak in ways we could never afford to be. The time has come for change, for unity." The council members exchanged glances, some still uncertain, but most of them seemed to be listening, their faces serious. Lara took a deep breath, steadying herself. She knew this was a crucial moment. How she spoke now would shape the future of her reign. "We will focus on strength," she continued, "but not just the kind of strength that comes from weapons or power. We will focus on the strength of our people, the strength that comes from supporting one another, working together, and using our minds as much as our hands. This kingdom can no longer afford to be isolated, to ignore the needs of its people." The council remained quiet. Lara could sense their hesitation, but she pushed forward. She had earned this position, and she would prove to them that she deserved it. "We will form alliances where they are needed, not just for power, but for the betterment of our people. I will not let this kingdom remain in the shadows of old traditions that have held us back for too long." Her voice grew stronger, more confident. "We will build a new future together." There was a long pause, and for a moment, Lara wondered if they would push back. But then, one of the older council members, a man with graying hair and a weathered face, stepped forward. "You've certainly changed," he said, his voice steady. "You speak with conviction, and it's clear you've learned much. I am willing to give you the chance to lead us into this new future." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Lyra felt a small but growing smile tug at her lips. She had done it. She had earned their trust. "But you must understand," the man added, his gaze sharp. "Your vision may not be easy to follow. Some of us are more traditional, and change is not something we embrace lightly." "I understand," Lyra said, nodding respectfully. "But change is necessary. The strength of a kingdom lies not in how rigidly it holds onto the past, but in how well it adapts to the future." The council members looked around at each other, their faces reflecting a mix of doubt and curiosity. For a long moment, no one spoke. Lyra waited, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew the challenges would not end here, but this was the first step. Finally, the king, her father, stood up. His face was unreadable as he gazed at his daughter, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of pride, perhaps, or acceptance. "You've earned the right to lead," he said, his voice steady. "You have the wisdom, the strength, and the courage to take this kingdom into a new age. I will support you, as will the council." A wave of relief washed over Lyra. She had feared this moment, feared the rejection, the doubt. But now, standing before her father and the council, she felt a sense of certainty. This was her kingdom. She had earned it, and she would lead it with everything she had. The council members bowed their heads, one by one, in acknowledgement of her authority. Lyra felt a mix of emotions, pride, relief, and even fear. She had come so far, but the journey wasn't over. There would be struggles ahead, obstacles she couldn't yet see. But she was no longer the frightened princess who had left the palace months ago. She was a leader now, and she would face whatever came next with the same strength and resolve she had discovered within herself. As she looked out over the council, she realized that the new era she had promised had already begun. The kingdom would change, and with it, so would the people. Lyra had proven that even the weakest could become the strongest, and that leadership wasn't just about power. It was about the will to forge a better future. And for the first time, she was sure of one thing: this kingdom, under her rule, would thrive. Lyra sat alone in her chambers, staring out the large window that overlooked the vast kingdom. The night sky stretched above her, filled with countless stars. She had spent so many years dreaming of the moment when she would finally sit on the throne. But now that she was here, everything felt different than she had imagined. The weight of responsibility pressed on her shoulders, but instead of feeling crushed by it, she felt a sense of purpose she had never known before. She had spent the last few days meeting with the council, listening to their concerns, and making decisions that would shape the future of the kingdom. It hadn't been easy. Some of the older, more traditional members had resisted her plans, but one by one, they had come to see the wisdom in her words. It was clear that change was necessary, but it would take time. Her father, King Zarian, had watched her closely, offering his quiet support. It had taken him some time to accept that she was no longer the fragile princess who had left the palace. But now he seemed proud of her. He had even spoken publicly about her leadership, giving her a legitimacy she had once only dreamed of. But it wasn't just her father's approval that mattered now. It was the people. They were the ones who would either follow her or reject her. And though they had been silent in the beginning, Lyra could feel their eyes on her. They were watching her every move, waiting to see if she could truly lead them into a new era. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. Lyra turned and saw Ithan standing in the doorway, his expression as calm and unreadable as ever. "You're quiet tonight," he said, his voice steady. Liara smiled faintly, just thinking. Ethan stepped into the room, his presence always steadying. About the future. She nodded, turning back to the window. About everything. I never imagined how hard it would be. The council's one thing, but the people, how can I make them believe in me? Ethan walked over and stood beside her, looking out at the kingdom. You've already done more than most leaders ever will. You've faced doubt, fear, and uncertainty, and you've come through it stronger. The people will see that. Liara shook her head slightly. I'm not sure. They've always looked at me as weak, and even though I've changed, I can't help but wonder if they'll ever see me as a true leader. Ethan's voice was soft but firm. It's not about what they see. It's about what you believe. You've earned this, Liara. You've proven yourself to them. And more importantly, to yourself. She turned to face him, her eyes searching his. And you've been with me through all of this. You've taught me, guided me. I don't know if I could have done it without you. Ethan gave her a small smile. You didn't need me to become a leader. You only needed someone who believed in you. I've just been here to remind you of that when you doubted yourself. Liara felt a wave of gratitude and something more, something she hadn't expected. She had spent so much time focused on her duties, on the weight of the throne, that she hadn't allowed herself to think about what came next for her personally. But now, standing here with Ethan, she realized that her journey wasn't just about the kingdom. It was about herself, about the person she had become. I'm ready, she said quietly, her voice filled with newfound certainty. Ready to face the future, no matter what it holds. Ethan's gaze softened, and for a moment, Liara saw something in his eyes, a quiet understanding. He had been there for her through the hardest moments. And now it was clear that their bond had grown into something stronger than just mentorship. I know you are, he said. And I'll be here, no matter what. Liara smiled, feeling a sense of peace she had never known before. She had become the leader she needed to be. But more than that, she had learned to trust herself, to face her fears and doubts head-on, and to rise above them. As she turned back to the window, the lights of the kingdom twinkling in the distance, she knew that her work was far from over. There would be challenges ahead. No kingdom could change overnight, but Liara was ready to face them. She was no longer just a princess. She was a queen, a leader, and a woman who had found her strength. The future was hers to shape, and she would do it with the same courage and determination that had brought her this far.